Hi everyone, my name is Andrea and I am the Calgary Pride Learning Series Coordinator. I use the pronouns she, she, and her. As part of the 30th anniversary for Calgary Pride, as well as part of the Learning Series, we are so happy to partner with CIJA, Calgary Jewish Federation, Temple B'nai Tikvah, and the congregation Beth, Tzedec, and Rabbi Sandra, Lawson to bring you this amazing workshop this year. Happy Pride, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the learning series.
Hi, I'm Andrea, she, her pronouns. This is my sibling Nadine, they, them. We would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered, the land in which we live, work, and play. The traditional Blackfoot name for this land is Okistinsis, where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. We acknowledge that we are in the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 people in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. This area is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We acknowledge that the land that we are on is a land that has been stolen, a land on which acts of genocide have been committed, acts that continue to this day. We acknowledge the violence, neglect, and silence the Indigenous community faces on a systemic and interpersonal level. We acknowledge that the violence of colonization is ongoing and our shared responsibility in ending that violence as settlers of this land.
Rabbi Sandra Lawson received ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in June of 2018. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and grew up in a military family. She graduated from St. Leo University magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology. She also holds a Master of Arts degree in sociology from Clark Atlanta University. Rabbi Sandra has served in the United States Army as a military police person with a specialty in military police investigations, specializing in cases involving child abuse and domestic violence. Upon leaving the military, she started a personal training business and later worked as an adjunct instructor of sociology at local community colleges. She has also served as the investigative researcher for the Anti-Defamation League Southeast region, becoming the go-to person when law enforcement in the South needed information on hate groups. She is also a writer for the Jewish publication The Forward. Rabbi Sandra's vision as a rabbi is to help build a more inclusive Jewish community where all who want to come are welcomed, diversity is embraced, and we can come together to learn and to pray. Rabbi Sandra is currently serving as the Associate Chaplain for Jewish Life and the Senior Jewish Educator at Hillel at Elwyn University in North Elwyn, Carolina.
And we are delighted to welcome today Rabbi Sandra.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just want to say hello. My name is Jess Burke. My pronouns are she and her. I'm one of the associate directors at the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and I do LGBTQ2+ partnerships. We are functionally the advocacy agent for the Jewish Federations of Canada, and we have a diverse range of queer folks across the country that represent that. We have some really amazing partners online because this is actually going to be part of Calgary Pride. So I just want to acknowledge that the executive director, Parker, is online. So hi, Parker. This is a really meaningful partnership for us. I want to acknowledge that Cantor Russell is online, who is from Beth Tzedec Congregation, who's one of our partners in Calgary, and Danielle Braitman from the Jewish Federation. We have Noah Faraj and David Friedland, who are advisory council members.
Evan Pilz, who is the chair of CIJA's LGBTQ2+ advisory. Andrea Levinste from Temple B'nai Tikvah.
I heard Rabbi Sandra, as many people have, at different conferences discussing what it is to be queer and Jewish largely, what it is to be Black and Jewish, what it is to show up in spaces. And we had a conversation last week that was extremely inspiring. So it really is a distinct privilege to have her here with us. And without further ado, I'm actually going to let Rabbi Sandra introduce herself. And so, Rabbi Sandra, I will pass it off to you, and I understand that we'll do the Q&A at the end.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. This is such a honor. In this era of COVID, I've done a few of these, but what I think is really cool, because there's always a blessing and a curse to things. And so COVID, you can see COVID as a curse, but the blessing side of it is I've gotten to meet so many people, and that I would never have had the opportunity to meet. Like Jess said, my name is Rabbi Sandra Lawson. I'm definitely a Rabbi Sandra. I'm not a Rabbi Lawson. That's cool. I just look for one of my parents, even though neither one of my parents are rabbis, but the name Lawson just sounds like parental. I am the campus rabbi for Elon University in North Carolina. My official title is the Associate Chaplain for Jewish Life, and the Hillel Jewish Educator. And one of the things that I try to do, is I'm often talking about challenging topics for people and expecting people to sort of trust each other. And so I want to do two things. I want to lead us off in a blessing. And the blessing that I want to lead us off in is the Moda Ani or Moda Ani, and largely not because of the timing, not because it's definitely not morning where I am, but it's a blessing of gratitude and thank you. The people who came up with our liturgy, they understood, I believe, that before you can actually hear a call from the divine, or before you can be receptive to what people have to say, you need to offer gratitude. So before we even get to our call to prayer, there's all these things of blessings of gratitude. And so I want to offer Moda Ani Lefanecha Ruachai Vechayam Shehazar Tabi Nishmati Bechem Lecha Rabba Emunatecha. Thank you, God, for giving us, for breathing another life into our bodies, giving us another day. And the Shehar Tabi Nishmati Bechem Lecha Rabba Emunatecha, that part for me is like a reminder of the awesomeness of the divine, the awesomeness of creation. We're all kind of coming from different spaces. It is not lost on me, the world that we're living in today. And last night, like many people, I saw a videotape of what happened to Mr. Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. I'm not going to pretend to know the details of what led up to that. I'm not even going to make any assumptions about what led up to that. But what I do know, from what I can see, is that similar, like with George Floyd, in my opinion, the officers who shot a man in the back, you can't tell me that at that moment they saw him as a human being. And that is where my heart breaks, and that we've gotten to a point that people who have the power of guns and the power of the state to decide to take lives is really heartbreaking for me. So I'm going to offer a Mishabera prayer. It's one that was taught to me by Rabbi Annie Lewis. And I'm actually going to sing it. When the world is sick, can't no one be well, but I dreamt we're all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can't no one be well, but I dreamt we're all beautiful and strong. Mishebera Avotenu Avraham Yitzhak ve'Yaakov. Mishebera Imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel ve'Leah. Uyevarech ve'Yirapeh et kolim. Uyevarech ve'Yirapeh et hakol. When the world is sick, can't no one be well, but I dreamt, yes I dreamt, we're all beautiful and strong. So before I begin, I'd like to invite a few of you, if you want to make some comments either in the chat or say something about, this moment. I just don't want to go from that to me talking. And also for me, I also watched some of the RNC convention last night, which is a Black queer woman I found to be scary. So there's just a lot that we're dealing with right now.
Hello, friends.
Hi.
My name is Parker. I use they, them pronouns, as just mentioned. I'm the executive director with Calgary Pride, and I'm coming to you from Treaty 7 territory. And I want to thank you so very much for providing space and for sharing with us your experiences and your knowledge. Right now, and I've said this to my team, the world feels like a very dark, scary place, particularly for those who are marginalized and most vulnerable. And I'm amazed by our team and our community at trying to create this bright light while living in what feels like a very dark place, and to create a beacon. And I'm deeply grateful for it. I'm grateful for the opportunities to learn, to employ my empathy and my scope of knowledge. And I thank you all for joining us today. And thank you so much, Jess. I was very privileged to go on a mission to Israel last year with Jess and some other LGBTQ2S+ activists. And it was one of the most, I don't even think yet I've still processed everything that I experienced. It was a really humbling series of experiences. And so I just want to express my gratitude to all of you. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Hasina, and I'm part of the board of directors for Calgary Pride. I'm really excited to be here today and to sort of take this as another opportunity to learn. There's also a personal reason why I'm here. I grew up in a religion that's non-affirming. So to be in this space to gain another perspective is very helpful.
Thank you. There's for me, there's something about singing that, regardless of what I think about my own voice, it gets me out of my head space into my heart space. And it allows me to be more open to talking and feel, at least in the Zoom era, to feel more connected, and that we are a kahal, we are a community as we spend this next hour together. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences in Jewish spaces, and I am speaking as an American with American perspective. I know some of what I have to say crosses oceans and borders, but my narrative is an American narrative, and my experiences are the experiences of a Black female queer rabbi living in the United States, and now particularly living in the southern part of the United States. And so I'm going to try to talk a little bit about that, and talk about what it's like to be queer and Black, and all those things. And I'm sure I'll probably leave something out, which is one of the cool things about the Q&A. So I want you all to feel comfortable asking me questions about that. And so, as I said before, I'm a Black rabbi. I'm a university rabbi. So I have the craziness of working with 18 to 21-year-olds and shape how they move through the world. So I see that as a privilege and an honor. One of the things I also want to say, if anything that I say that is uncomfortable for you, if you are somebody who identifies as white, or if you have white privilege, or if not, really, if what I have to say is uncomfortable, I just invite you to say uncomfortable, and as a community we can move through that process so that we can all grow. And so as a Black Jewish person in America, I have watched many Jews who were white in the United States make false assumptions about who is and who is not Jewish. In other words, I, as a Black Jew in the United States, experience racism on a regular basis, and my experiences are not unique. They are experiences that many Jews of color experience, and many Jews of color can relate to my experiences. In fact, I've never been in a Jewish space where at some point my identity has not been questioned. If the people know that I'm Jewish, if I'm coming there to pray, and when I was living in Israel, often I would just go and not tell people I was Jewish because that would just be safer. But I've never been in a Jewish space where at some point my identity has not been questioned. I'm not talking about going in a Jewish space as Rabbi Sandra Lawson is coming to speak. I'm talking about I just want to go sit in the pew, pray, daven like everybody else. And so I don't know what it's like just to walk into a Jewish space and not have my identity questioned. I've been asked multiple times by strangers how I'm Jewish, when did I convert, or am I an ordained rabbi? And that's when they know that I'm a rabbi, that's a question they ask. I get asked that question a lot. Don't you have to be Jewish to be a rabbi? That's funny to me, but I get that. I've gotten that more than 3 times, so it's kind of, yeah, it's a real thing. This kind of questioning, which I often call an investigation or an interrogation, even if well-intended, because people often say they're just curious, makes me and people who look like me feel unwelcomed. So I present as a Black person. I also present as what I call a non-gender conforming queer woman. And so I don't fit neatly into the gender role binary for people. And so that, I guess, causes some confusion for people. So even if I don't want to engage in this line of questioning, I'm often prevented from going about my day. So I walk into a synagogue and you all, a white person, want to say, oh, when did you convert? Like, because that's a real thing, it happens. But I just want to say, I just want to go and sit and pray, or I just want to do something. I am often prevented from doing that with more lines of questioning. And I'm bombarded by, like, why you as a white person need to know intimate details about my life. And so questions like these send messages to people like me that we do not belong. In order to belong, white people need to feel safe. And so I offer that part because if it was really about being curious about my Jewish origin story, if I give you a boundary, you would respect it. And if you don't respect it, then there's something else going on. And I really think this is about trauma in the Jewish community. I'm going to talk a little bit about systemic racism. And then I'm going to talk about how I believe we've come to trying to explain how we treat marginalized folks in our country. One of the reasons I think that I've been getting a lot of attention is a few months ago during, our first wave of, we're still in the first wave of COVID, but when we really started to be isolated, I sent a tweet out, and that tweet actually turned into an op-ed piece. And what the tweet said was, let me be clear, you were either racist or anti-racist. And those are the two choices. The latter means that you were working every day, either emotionally or physically, to dismantle the racism that we all have been taught since day one in the United States. And so I'm going to take this, that was the tweet, and so I'm going to take this time to unpack that. And so I'm using the term racism, but this is more of a larger problem of how we view people who have privilege, people who don't have privilege, how we view marginalized groups and how we don't. So to do that, I'm going to provide this analogy. It seems to work. People like it. I used to teach at a college, and I came up with this analogy at the time, and I've adapted it. I don't know how the idea came to me. So what I want us to imagine for a second, that we are babies, and we're babies without bias. We don't have biases because we haven't learned them yet. And so imagine that we are out in the rain, and we're getting wet. Don't ask me why a baby's out in the rain. Just kind of go with me. I have to add that piece because when I start telling a story, people say, "Why is baby out in the rain? Why is baby out in the rain?" It's just a story. It's okay. So, also imagine that that rain is made up of all the biases that we learn about different groups in our society. So in that rain is racism, homophobia, sexism, antisemitism, and so on. And as we grow up, we continue to get rained on, and we learn untrue stories based on stereotypes about Black and brown people, people of color, women, gay people, and other marginalized folks. The messages that the rain conveys tells us that in America, being white, straight, male, and Christian is normative. And then hopefully as we grow up, we will notice and realize that at some point, oh my God, I'm like soaking wet. And we want to unlearn all the biases that we were taught. We don't want to be racist. We don't want to be sexist. We don't want to be homophobic. And we don't want to contribute to a racist society. So we dry off. But the problem is that the rain returns over and over again, and we have to continue to dry off. That's racism. That's sexism. That's all of the isms that exist in our society. The rain comes back over and over again, and we have to continue to work hard to unlearn what we have been taught about marginalized groups in our society. We all suffer from the ills of racism because we're all a product of a system designed to privilege one group of people over another group of people. And so, therefore, we can choose to be racist or we can choose to be anti-racist. Constantly drying off. When I say racist, and again, this has a lot to do with what I'm witnessing right now, I don't know what comes up for people. I don't know what someone's definition of racism is, but what I do know is that it is the worst possible, for many people, it is the worst possible thing you can call someone. Largely because racism is associated with the KKK, neo-Nazis, enslaved Americans, lynchings. And yes, those are all excellent examples of racism. But focusing on these examples and these definitions of what it means to be racist keeps white people from identifying racism in their communities and in their daily lives and understanding that racism has evolved. It also causes many to proclaim, "I'm not racist, and I don't see color," and causing many Jews to say, "I'm not white." The problem is that saying that one is not racist also means that you're not doing anything to dismantle our racist system. And if you say you're colorblind and you don't see race, how will you ever see or understand racism? And how will you ever understand the racism that I experience as a Black person regularly? And how will you understand the racism I experience from other Jews? The racism that I experience in the United States is vastly different from the racism my parents experienced in the 50s and 60s. And thank God it's very different than my grandparents and my great-grandparents. The concentration on the KKK and neo-Nazi as examples of racism narrows the focus of racism and makes white Americans believe that they have never witnessed racist behavior unless it's on video. And it creates the assumption for many that racism in America is over. And so as I close this piece out, what I want to say to my Jewish family that I love, we must listen to the experiences of Black Jews, brown Jews, Jews of color, and we must acknowledge and accept that racism exists in our societies and in our communities, and we must work hard to dismantle and eliminate racism wherever it appears so that we can truly live up to our Jewish values and remember that we were all present at Sinai. So I'm going to sort of pause there. And what I often get from many folks is one of the challenges when I talk about racism is that I get this Jews aren't white, which is true. There's lots of Jews aren't white, but there are Jews who benefit from white privilege. And when European Jews came to the United States, no, they weren't considered white. That's because whiteness evolves. When this country was founded, again, like I said, this country was designed from day one to privilege one group of people over another group of people. And at the founding of our country, white meant something very specific. It meant you came from Great Britain, you owned property, and property, remember, was often people, that was whiteness. And over time, other European groups were allowed into whiteness, so Germans, Italians, Irish, so forth and so on. And that also meant at some point European Jews were allowed into whiteness, but at a cost. European Jews assimilated into whiteness, and that often meant for some, giving up their last name. And at the early part of the 20th century, many synagogues had services on Sundays, and many Jews stopped wearing, kippot. I'm wearing a kippah right now, and doing the things that sort of would outwardly make them Jewish. Today, we've sort of swung back a little bit. And what I say to the Jewish community is that you can suffer, Jews who are white, you can suffer from anti-Semitism and have white privilege at the same time. Both of those things exist. And yes, you lose your white privilege in white communities when they realize you're Jewish. That is not an option that people of color who outwardly present as people of color have. And so I think that's where the Jewish community needs to grow a little bit. And by saying I'm not white, I'm Jewish, all that does is disrupt the conversation and moves the focus away from the problem at hand. I'm pausing in my mind a little bit because this morning, I like many Americans, I was so heartbroken. I put an Instagram photo of Mr. Blake on my Instagram account. And someone took that opportunity to talk about Palestinians. And I said to that person, I said, this is a distraction. You're taking my pain to focus on another issue. Please unfriend me. And so the other thing I want to say is that anti-Semitism and racism, both horrible, play out very differently in our society. Anti-Semitism in the United States and everywhere was about scapegoating. Jews get blamed for whatever the ills are in the country, the economy. I have a friend of mine who lives in Israel, Black Jewish woman, who I think she's made 2 of these posts where she makes a video of things going wrong throughout her day, and every time something goes wrong, she blames the Jews. And so it's funny because she's Jewish and she's Black, but it's like, she drinks, my wine is bad, blame the Jews. And so it's sort of this reminding people that anti-Semitism is about scapegoating. And you see it now you see it more and more, and now since we're sort of in this, this presidential season. But, I personally started seeing more of it after 2016, where people felt emboldened to express anti-Semitic views. But if you watch, it's always about blaming Jewish people for whatever it is. Racism, on the other hand, has always been about capitalism. Black people were property. And I use social media a lot. Another friend of mine posted a picture or something, and she said, nobody called Black people lazy until we stopped working for free. And so I want people to understand that because, yes, they're both bad, but they operate differently in our society. I'm trying to think if there's something else I'm forgetting. So maybe it's a good time to let's just have a conversation.
What is it like being a part of 2 communities that have historically had disfavorable views towards being LGBTQ2+? If
I forget, that reminded me of something, so I'm going to come back to that, but it just reminded me. I think that the Jewish community is now moving into the same place that Black people are, in the sense that Black people understand how racism plays out in our society. And so we sort of use a broader definition of racism, like the one I described. And so that racism is a system designed to privilege one group of people over another group of people. So many Black people are not surprised. They don't like it, but are not surprised when racist things come from white people. I think the Jewish community is starting to figure out that anti-Semitism, like racism, is part of the DNA of our country. And that America is anti-Semitic, America is homophobic, America is racist because the system was designed to be that way from the very beginning. So to answer your question, Jess, I don't know any different. This is. I've always been Black. I've been queer as long as I can remember, and I really believe I had a Jewish soul from the beginning, even though I may not have understood what that meant early on. And I see anti-Semitism everywhere and in many different spaces, and it's so subtle. And I see racism in many spaces. It's subtle. There's a student who's amazing. She, like I said, I love working with young people. But part of the challenge we have now is to start educating people when subtle racism, I don't know what else to call it, that is sort of part of our DNA. So the student said, not a Jewish student, and I work at a university. There's a multi-faith campus with a lot of chaplains that work for the university. We got the 5 main ones covered. And she just sort of casually said, I believe in the loving God of the New Testament, not the wrath of the God or something like that in the Old Testament. And I said, ow! It's just like, Rabbi, what? And so what I didn't say to her then, but she did understand that what she said was problematic. But if I had to do over, I would say, that's anti-Semitism. When you say that you believe that you say this God is good because in this New Testament, that is part of the origin of anti-Semitism. And it's so subtle. Like people don't even realize often when it creeps up. And so as our country evolves, like I grew up in a family, I was such the crazy kid that nobody really cared. By the time I came out, it was like, okay, whatever. I never had like an issue with that with my parents, but our society is less homophobic. So like where before legally it was totally okay to discriminate against people of color. Now we have some laws in place that say you can't do that. And we also, it used to be okay to discriminate against gay people, and we now have some laws that say you can't do that. And so as our society evolves, it's becoming less and less okay to treat certain groups with disdain. So that's what I'll say to your question. I hope that was helpful. So your thoughts on anti-Semitism in progressive spaces like Women's March and certain prides. Yeah, so I move in progressive spaces. I don't really move in Orthodox spaces, although I have some really cool Orthodox rabbi friends. And depending on where I am, I may wind up in Orthodox spaces. And I don't spend a lot of time in like politically conservative spaces. So that's the space I'm in. When anti-Semitism shows up in those spaces, depending on how they show up, and if I'm in a relationship with people, I will educate them. I'm like, that what you just said is anti-Semitic. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was at some kind of organization, but everybody in the room was black queer women, which I miss those spaces. But it was cool. And, and someone said something anti-Semitic. It was like obviously anti-Semitic. It wasn't one of those subtle things. And before I could say anything, or was even question if I should say anything, or wonder if I was in a safe space, the women who, because I think the woman who said something anti-Semitic is like, oh, nobody here is Jewish or something like that. And the people that I was sort of loosely connected with, not like buddies, they jumped to the defense of Jews. They were like, And not everybody in that room knew that I was Jewish, but we just basically put her in her place and just told her how anti-Semitic that is. And took the time to educate her. And I don't think I don't know where she is. If I saw her today, I'm not sure I would even recognize her. And that was really powerful because that was what it was like to be in a room full of allies. What I find kind of sad right now is that the initial platform, the movement for Black Lives. So I'll just take this time because I don't want to make any assumptions here. So Black Lives Matter is basically a grassroots organization. The phrase is a chant. It's a hashtag that grew out of what happened to Trayvon Martin and what happened in Ferguson. It's sort of the hashtag was created after the verdict of Trayvon Martin, and it grew out of the protest in Ferguson. And so out of that, you have several grassroots organizations. And from that, in 2016, I think they came up with a platform, the Movement for Black Lives. And there was a very large platform. By the way, another one is about to come out soon. And a tiny part of that platform, of this massive platform, was anti-Semitic. It was bad. But it was a small piece, but actually talked mostly about demilitarization. Many people in the Jewish community who were never engaged in conversations with Black organizations called it out and said, I can't support these organizations. But I know from grassroots organizations that these Jewish organizations weren't supporting Black organizations anyway. Today, if you were to look for this statement, you can't find it. And that's because Jews who stayed in relationships with organizations that were part of the movement for Black Lives got them to see this is problematic, this is anti-Semitic, and this is wrong. You can't make changes if you were never part of the conversation. So there is anti-Semitism throughout the conservative world, progressive world. And if I want to stay in relationship and stay in progressive spaces, to the ability that I am comfortable, I need to take the time to explain. You may not know this, but this is anti-Semitic, and let me tell you why. And I'll give you one more example. There's an older woman that was very helpful to me when I was in my 20s. I saw her as a mentor. And we've lost touch over the years. And for some crazy reason, she sent me this anti-Semitic message on Facebook. And I didn't know it when I opened it. I watched like 5 minutes of it. And I said, please, I have a lot of respect for you. You know, you helped me out when I was young, but don't send me things like this. It's anti-Semitic. And I'm sure if I continued watching it, it would be racist. And she's a white woman. And she said, can you tell me why? And so I did. I took the time to tell her, and then it just sort of, again, articulated to not send those things to me, and I encouraged her to do some research. So we need to the ability that we're comfortable. It's racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, all those things are so in our society, and there are many times where people just don't even know the origins of what they're saying and what they mean. Doesn't excuse it. It's just that we need to educate people, and people need to educate themselves. And our schools don't even teach history properly. We tell history from one narrative, and that narrative is designed to privilege one group of people over another. And when we start telling fuller stories, then we can finally start to move past all this crap and I think really heal our country.
So I have another question here. You were talking earlier about a student discussing the Old Testament and the New Testament, condemning the Old Testament. And when I'm in queer spaces, there's a lot of anti-religious sentiment. And a lot of it comes from Catholic school survivors, people that have had really narrow and really negative experiences. And then when they're in their safe space, they criticize that, but their rhetoric intersects a lot with anti-Semitic rhetoric. How do you acknowledge that in a way that stops the anti-Semitism, but also acknowledges their trauma?
Yeah. But first of all, what I do spend a lot of time doing is when people say things like God believes this, or God says this, or whatever, or religion says this. Here, it's often, it's a Christian version of God, or it's a Christian version of religion. And so trying to get people to understand that what you're describing is not universal, it's particular. It's a particular definition or idea from your religion and your stream of Christianity. And so that's one of the challenges of living in a Christian hegemonic society, that, religion, when people say religion, they're talking about Christian. They're not talking about any other religion. The second half of what you're saying, because I work with students, I'm often saying to them, that, we were a people. We were those people who we left Egypt, we left Mitzrayim, we left the narrow place, and because we were free. We're like finally free, and we're gonna follow this guy who hears voices, because I don't want to be a slave anymore. So I'm gonna follow Moshe Rabbeinu. And then we follow him in the desert, and all these things start to happen, parting the sea, and then we get to the base of Sinai, and then we become a people. We become Jews, we become Israelites, or however you want to say it. So we were a people first. A people first. We were, a mixed multitude. The Torah says, Vagam Erev Rav. We were a mixed multitude of people, like I said, who threw our lot in with this guy who hears voices. One of these days I might get in trouble for that. I just think it's funny. And then we were people. We were people trying to figure out our way, create a new society, trying to get to the land that God will show us, that showed us or promised us. Christianity shows up later and says, hey, y'all are a religion. And so we're a religion and a people, which is kind of why to be Jewish does not require a belief in a deity. Yes, we have a deity. Yes, we believe in God. Yes, we have one God. But if you think about what makes someone Jewish, you either have a Jewish parent, if you are Reform or Reconstructionist, and I think Renewal, you have to have a Jewish mom if you're Orthodox and conservative. Basically, you need a Jewish parent. Or you convert in. That's it. So, and I think, at least for the students that I work with, that is sort of like, poof, it's sort of like mind-opening a little bit. But even when I don't work with students, sort of reminding them that the language you're talking about is not universal. It is not universal to me. It's particular to you. And that's because when you have privilege in society, you can walk around believing that what you're saying is for everybody when it's not. When I was in the military, all the language was he. And people thought that he was universal. I'm like, no, it's not. You're talking about a man. If it's so universal, then throw a she in there every once in a while. So I hope that was helpful. If not, you can push me a little bit more.
Can you speak more about the dynamics of being in a marriage that is both interfaith and interracial?
It's so funny. I wonder sometimes, my wife and I are just living our lives, and we don't really often think about what other people think about us. My wife is this amazing woman that I met when I was a rabbinical student, who made me laugh and reminded me, stop taking yourself so seriously. If you know anything about rabbinical school, if you know rabbis and they've told you stories, it can be very challenging in a lot of ways. Actually, like I said earlier, I was in the military. Rabbinical school was much harder. Just the emotional labor, all of the learning of history and all and the challenges, and also because it's not about whether you can pass. There's just a lot. So I met her at that time. She grew up Catholic, does not subscribe to the Catholic religion, and I was very clear. It's weird when you're on your first date, and I say, look, I'm going to be a rabbi, and if this goes anywhere, you're going to have to really think about converting, or we need to only have one religion in our house. And we're still having that conversation, but we only have one religion in our house. And my wife is not Jewish, but we have a Jewish family. We had a Jewish wedding, and yeah, we live in a predominantly white part of North Carolina in a privileged neighborhood, and I have a Black Lives Matter sign in English and Hebrew, and there's Trump people everywhere. But those same people who I'm pretty sure vote for Trump checked on our house when we were out of town, picked up our mail, asked us how we're doing. That's what it's like to be in community. Even one of my neighbors said to my wife, I couldn't have that sign in my yard. You love who you love, and I'm grateful every day for her. And I don't realize sometimes that there are people, I forget sometimes there are people in the Jewish community that for whatever reason hate that. They can't stand it. And I'm like, well, that's because you have a problem. So yeah, I don't even think about it. Like I said, we're just living our lives. We have a mortgage, we have bills. It's pretty boring most of the time.
I think in my community, especially, I have a lot of friends that are in interfaith partnerships, religious partnerships, and they're always trying to look for a model of a healthful relationship that exists that is honoring that, because it's not common in the Jewish community. Or at least it's not the typical, the standard or the status quo. Yeah. I have another question here in the chat. In taking up and making space as queer Jewish folks, is there a process of decolonization that has to take place in understanding queerness in a cultural or religious context? And if so, how is that received?
Yeah. So like the process of decolonization. So one of the things I love about this is that a lot of times I get the same questions, and a lot of times I get questions that really stump me. And this is sort of one of those. And this, whatever comes out of my mouth, I will carry this into the next time I do one of these. I think we need to figure out as a society how we tell fuller stories. Howard Zinn, who passed away a decade or so ago, was a historian. And he was a professor at Spelman College, and he was Jewish. And when he was alive, like every so many years, he would write new editions of the People's History of the United States. And while I was in college, that was my favorite history book. And when I became a teacher, it was the history book that I recommended. And we need more of that. What's in this history book, it's not just telling the story of Christopher Columbus. It is telling the story of the people who were around Christopher Columbus when he discovered America. It's not just about saying how, we colonized Hawaii. It's telling the story of the other people who were part of that process and what they witnessed. And when I read these stories, it was the first time I got a fuller understanding of how we came to be. And we don't tell full stories. So like protesters here, many protesters that people want to take down, not just Confederate monuments, but monuments of George Washington. And I do believe we don't need Confederate monuments, but I am of the belief that if we tell that Thomas Jefferson, yes, he was one of the founders of our country, and he owned slaves. George Washington, yes, great general, and he owned slaves. We need to tell those two stories back to back. We need to tell why Andrew Jackson is considered the most racist president. That may change in a few more years, but Andrew Jackson is considered the most racist president because he basically defied what the Supreme Court said around moving Native people and did it anyway. And we now know that that was the Trail of Tears. We just don't tell that. And I think when we start to tell fuller stories instead of stories from one particular lens, we will heal. There were Senator McCain, Republican, passed away a few years ago. He opposed the King holiday. A few years before he died, he apologized for that. He didn't understood what that really meant. I think maybe in his mind is like, we don't need more holidays. But instead, people took the time to educate him, or he started to educate himself, and he later apologized and said that was a mistake. And that's what we need to do. And until we do that, we're gonna keep seeing what we're seeing happen to trans people. I mean, Black trans women are I just want to cry sometimes. We need to find a way in our society to educate people, and so that we can move forward and heal.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sandra.
Are there any scriptures or any learnings in the books that you follow, so the Torah or Midrash? Are there any scriptures that actually allude to being queer affirming, or how do you reconcile being queer when it comes to lining up with the Torah?
Yeah, so, okay, I love this question. Nobody's asked me, but I do love this question. So, what I often tell people is that, first of all, our text that we use, we're the people of the book for a reason, because we got a lot of books. Our libraries of books. The Talmud is basically a library of Jewish law. And we have the Torah and the Hebrew Bible. For the longest time, all of our texts and all of our liturgy were written by and seen through the eyes of men. Men with particular experiences from their time period. So the Talmud is basically a series of books from like the 5th century. And it doesn't mean that these were bad people. It just meant they had a worldview that was particular to them. We moved to the second wave of the feminist movement. And now you have, en masse, more women who are becoming Jewish scholars, becoming rabbis. And now they are looking at these same texts, not through the eyes of men, even though men wrote them, but they're looking at these texts through the eyes of women. And it's the first time that we start to see what I call queering of text. And then we have queer people come along looking at the same text, benefiting from the feminist movement, and also adding their take. So that's when we start to lift up the story of Jonathan and David. Because if you read the story of Jonathan and David, there's a lot going on there that, could allude to some relationships. There's lots of conversations around love. Ruth and Naomi, also perfect examples. We also lift up the daughters of, I keep blanking this, I can't ever say it. The daughters, the Zelophehad, whatever, I can't, doesn't roll off my mouth. But they basically went to Moses and said, when Moses, following God's instructions saying that women can't have, or all the property should go to men, these daughters stepped up and said, we don't have brothers. We're going to lose the property from that we should inherit. And the rabbis argued that was pretty bold. They could have been killed because they weren't supposed to do that. And God and Moses agreed, yeah, you should be able to inherit your father's property. There's some other funky things that happen later on, but we won't talk about that with their property. There's some rules attached to it. But these were stories that were not lifted up. And I'm not a Talmud scholar. I do study Talmud, but I don't consider myself a Talmud scholar. But there is a lot in the Talmud around non-gender conforming, non-binary, people who don't fit neatly into gender roles or sex and things like that. So there is a lot in our text.
A rabbi that I follow had shared something a few months ago, and I looked on his Facebook, and it looks like it was taken down, so I think he probably received a lot of backlash.
I know.
But he's a rabbi that posted something about racism in the Torah, and he said that Zipporah, who was the wife of Moses, Moses' sister mocked her for being dark-skinned, being the equivalent of what was considered black to the region. And then she was smited by getting leprosy. And he said, this is a reminder. And it said, every day we are actually required to pray to remind ourselves that this act of blatant racism resulted in leprosy, or resulted in God being very hurt and very upset because of this view on Sephora. Do you have any feelings about that?
I do. First, I'll say that I was at a prayer vigil earlier this summer at the beginning, when we started to be locked down. It was actually shortly after what happened to George Floyd. And I was with an imam, a Catholic priest, an Episcopal priest, and myself. And we were in that Torah portion. And that's the Torah portion where, basically Moses prays to God, please heal my sister. Because she was struck with this disease that made her skin flaky. I would argue that racism does not actually appear in the Torah. Racism is a product of how people have interpreted texts based off of the centuries that they were living in. But during this vigil, I said that there is no whiteness in the Torah, or there's no racism in the Torah, or something like that. And I said, in fact, the only time whiteness appears is in this Torah portion where Zipporah is struck with the disease of whiteness. Now, that was a commentary on that that fit that moment. But if you read the text deeper, there's no reference to the word is actually like flaky skin or something like that, which you can interpret that she becomes white.
And then he shared something else. It was a white woman holding up a sign, and it said, I don't know who needs to hear this, but nobody in the Bible was white. But I believe that the Torah is a living document. And so one of the things I love about it is, living, not trying to say we're trying to add more words to it, but it lives in our hearts as we go through the Jewish cycle. And so one of the things that I love is, like, today we're in CIJA, and usually, what comes up for me is this is also the Torah that talks about, that has been used to condemn gay people because it talks about, men shouldn't wear women's clothing. And that is like my pocket Torah that I talk a lot about. But the Torah, because we read it every year and we're filtering it through the lens of what we are experiencing in the moment. So the word kitetse is like, you shall not, is to go out. But in this text, it's talking about, it's actually about like war. There's all these rules around war, and there's things you shouldn't do in war, like kill fruit trees, because killing fruit trees is not about killing someone, but it's about like harming future generations. But a few lines down, there's a text that says, you shall not abhor an Egyptian. You should not hate an Egyptian, because, you were strangers in the land of Egypt, or something like that. And when I looked at the commentary from Rashi, because it is kind of interesting, like I was thinking, like, you shouldn't hate. And then you look at the commentary from Rashi, and Rashi's like, of course, this makes sense. They enslaved us. They enslaved you. Why would you not hate them? You have every right to hate them. But then he says, but you should remember, and he doesn't say forgive, I'm saying forgive. You should remember that they took you in when you needed help. And so therefore you should not hate them. You should forgive them. Now, he doesn't say forgive, that's just me. And so I'm saying all this to say that, like, the Torah sort of lives, where we are today. And so I was reading this after I saw the morning after I saw the video. And it just sort of reminds me to not have hate in my heart. Oh, also right after I saw the RNC convention, and that we're moving into this time period of people are taking sides and people are hating this group and hating this group, and that we should not do that. And so reading Torah and making it relevant to the lives that we're living in also means that we're not seeing the text the same way our ancestors saw it. And that also means we may not even be seeing it the way it was written. And so I can totally understand where that rabbi was coming from. And I think that's one of the things that rabbis are constantly trying to do, is to make the text relevant, especially rabbis who are focused on social issues, to make Torah relevant for today. you mentioned that Black trans women are the most like predisposed to violence, that this is an ongoing like series of trauma. With regards to Jewish values and life saving, or the sanctity of life being like the highest of preservations, how do you view being an ally for trans folks in line with Jewish identity?
I view them like similarly. So the text that I've been leaning on with my students these days, it comes from the Mishnah and the Talmud. It's in the Sanhedrin 15 something. And it says in English that one who destroys a life, it's as if they have destroyed an entire world, and one who saves a life, it's as if they've saved an entire world. Depending on which version of the Talmud you have, it's slightly different, but it is basically that is what it says. All these questions around, what, I know you're talking about trans women in particular, but like these questions around what these people were doing to cause law enforcement to kill them, what trans women were doing to cause someone to cause them harm. Like our values, you should not destroy a life. You should not take a life. And you need to remember that we're all, created in the image of God. And if that means something to you and you do something harmful, that means you're not seeing the humanity in someone and you're not seeing the divine image in that person.
So this person asks, what is the best way to be an ally without sensationalizing trauma?
I do agree that there is a lot of people often posting things to get attention on social media. There's also some value. If people didn't see a video of what happened to George Floyd, if they didn't see the video what happened to Jacob Blake, if they didn't listen to the 911 call from Breonna Taylor, if they didn't see those men hunt down Ahmaud Arbery, we wouldn't be having these conversations today. And sadly, seeing video does something to people's hearts in ways that you just can't get from reading. And so I do agree that oversharing, because I still remember all those videos of 911 during September 11th, where the news agencies realized that was too much. My concern is that if we don't share these videos sometimes, we're going to be right back where we were before, with people not believing Black and brown people. And we're still sort of there, calling attention to it versus sensationalizing it. The picture I posted of Jacob Blake and his son, like I blocked out the son, and I shared a Hebrew blessing. I shared the blessing that I sang at the beginning of this session. And when I turned on my phone, I was kind of shocked at how many people had seen it. And I'm also getting a lot of hate from it, which is kind of surprising to me. But I also think because of social media, this is a way for people to grieve, to share their pain. If people are sharing this, I hope that they have the right intentions in mind.
Thank you. James shared a quote that he has come across, is that racism hasn't changed. It's just being filmed now.
Yeah.
He shared that. And part 2 of the question was, and this goes to you're speaking about your package and the way you show up in spaces. So I'd love if you could speak more about that just generally. But the question is, do you find that allies pick one part of your identity to focus on, or are most people kind of holistic about yourself?
So, yeah, I think my quick answer is that most people pick one part. But I think we're moving into an area where we understand intersections of identity a little better. Doesn't mean it's perfect. And so a colleague of mine also gets similar issues where you don't talk about anti-Semitism, you're always talking about racism. I'm like, I spent most of my adult life working in the Jewish world. Like, how am I not addressing anti-Semitism? And I think that's because, for many, at least in the Jewish world, are starting to discover that if you have multiple marginalized identities, that it's not always the Jewish one that's going to show up in spaces. and that I can be my full self, but I talk about racism because I'm focused on the Jewish community because I want the Jewish community to be anti-racist, but I experience racism in the Jewish spaces. I remember years ago, long time ago, I was dating a woman who asked me, a white woman who asked me, which is more important to you, your Black identity or your feminist identity? And I was like, I don't even understand the question. Like, she's like, well, doesn't one take pride? I said, no. I loosely connected with her, and I don't think she would think that today. But yeah, there's a lot of people who have one marginalized identity and see another person with the same marginalized identity, but think that they may not have others or that one should take priority. And also, when I am invited into spaces to talk about just X, I will say, depending on the circumstances, that I can't do that. Like, I'm a whole person, and I don't experience Jewish spaces as a white Jew or as a straight Jew. Or I experience Jewish spaces as an interfaith, married, queer, Black, vegan. Like,
Definitely. What first steps can a synagogue community take if they want to start having these difficult conversations?
the first thing I often tell communities is to look at your pictures on your wall. So I say that because I've been in far too many progressive, when we used to go to synagogues, far too many progressive spaces where they still have images on the walls of a white bearded man with a prayer shawl on and a kippah and tefillin. And no one in the community looks like that. Like, I've been in communities where hardly anybody wore a kippah, and they still have these images on the walls elevating Judaism from a particular generation. And that does harm. Or I'll see images of only heterosexual couples. Or I see images of only men doing honors in Jewish spaces. Or I don't see pictures of Jews of color. And so I've been in a community that had several Jews of color, and there was no images of them in their photos of community members. And so if we don't start to change those images, we're never going to help create a different understanding of what the Jewish community looks like. We're not Jews in Eastern Europe anymore. We are American Jews. We've been here long enough now where we're starting our own stream of Judaism. And I say that only because, like, I believe a generation from now, not even a generation from now, like, when we talk about Sephardic Jews and we talk about Mizrahi Jews, we talk about Ashkenazi Jews, we'll also be talking about American Jews, because we're creating our own sort of culture, our own understanding of Judaism. But that is the thing that sort of gets under my skin. Like, when I go in these spaces and I don't see anything on the wall that represents the people who are actually in those spaces. And I think that's one of the first things. And then I think the leadership of the community needs to take an active step in trying to dismantle the racism that's in their community. I say that because, before all this happened, when I would talk to my colleagues about, what are you doing to address racism? Oh, I can't deal with that. That's just too much. It's not my place. And I think that's irresponsible. If your job description included welcoming people and being the face of the community, doing anything else, you would have to do it. You can't say, I don't want to educate myself on this. It's too much. I can't deal with it. Racism allows us to sort of ignore things. The best way I can explain this is that nobody in my community knows how to blow the shofar. I can't say, we ain't having one, can't do it. I'm learning how to blow it because it's irresponsible of me. It would be irresponsible to not either figure out how to do it or to find somebody to do it. And so communities need to either educate themselves or bring someone in that can help educate them.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sandra. That's really insightful. And I think it's just paramount right now. We've all kind of hiatus from going to synagogue or going anywhere because of COVID. And it's so important that we recognize when we go back, things cannot be the same.
Do you have any personal experiences with someone who has been radicalized by harmful figures? So folks that are very right-wing Jewish online that are kind of gatekeeping Judaism. And this person would love to hear your thoughts on how to diffuse like harmful situations like this? You're very in online spaces, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And what is that like?
So the first part, I work with a guy, his name is Andrew. He's in the religious studies department at Elon. And he actually was radicalized. He has written a book about it, or has written the process of writing a book. And we've had a lot of conversations of what that's like. So other than that, I don't have any experiences to that. As far as like online spaces, is to just not engage. I'm trying to spread positive energy and love and hopefulness. It doesn't mean that I don't like discuss challenging things. If someone is so crazy, I just don't engage because I don't see the point. I also block people. Not a lot, because I do want people to express themselves. But sometimes people's ideas are just so far removed that there's just no point, and you can't have a dialogue often online. And when I have had conversations, the few of them that I've had, I wouldn't say they were radicalized, but they were more to the point of just trying to pick an argument with me and not trying to engage with me. It's not worth it. But there are people out there who disagree, but they're open to dialogue and they want to learn. Doesn't mean you're going to change their mind, but if you can have a dialogue with someone, then you can at least understand where that person's coming from.
And you mentioned earlier, you said, people are so interested in mine and my wife's life, but we're really kind of boring. Like we're just hanging out. We don't think of it very often. So you may feel similarly, but as someone who is queer and who is Black and who is Jewish, are you tired of constantly advocating for yourself? Does it get to be a lot to advocate for yourself all of the time in all these different spaces and all these different ways?
When I was studying to be a rabbi, I was concerned that I was going to be unhirable. Not because I didn't have the knowledge, but I wanted to be given a chance. And my first 2 years of rabbinical school, I didn't feel like I was given a chance. And I remember, so I had a friend of mine who is now a rabbi in New Jersey, and she was transitioning, entered rabbinical school as a man with a beard, tzitzit and all that. And then her and I are sitting at a bar with another friend of mine who presents outwardly as someone who uses male pronouns, but she uses female pronouns. And we're like just hanging out as first and second year rabbinical school students. And then all of a sudden we start saying we're never going to get hired. And then we start to share our pain. I didn't know what they were going through. My female friend actually is now a social worker, dropped out of medical school, but my other friend is now a successful rabbi in New Jersey. And I was concerned, and I wanted to find some way to express the challenges that I was having, where I would go on interviews and you have to work. By the way, you have to work as a rabbi to become a rabbi. There's no workaround, and so I had to go on job interviews in communities, but I wasn't given a chance to showcase my skills because whoever was asking me questions was so concerned about how I could exist. And so I went to people who had power and talked to them. And then I started to publicly share my story because I got tired of, dodging racist questions. And so that's kind of where I started from. Today I am a rabbi, and that gives me more authority and power in places that I didn't have before. But I also know right now that every single rabbinical school in the United States has a Black student. Every single one of them. And the Black rabbis who are in the world right now, we all have experienced racial bias in the hiring process. And so even though I may be tired, I really am trying to make the next generation of rabbis, make it easier for them. And also for my colleagues who are white, who have children of color, who are just now experiencing racism through their children's eyes. And so, yeah, some of it is exhausting. And I do have a pretty good regimen for self-care. And I'm also sort of surprised now. All of a sudden, people want to listen to me. So.
I had a friend who shared something like that. She's both from an interfaith family and she's someone who's biracial. Actually, you know her. You're personal friends. It's Temma.
Oh my God, yes.
She said to me,
I have referenced Temma several times, but y'all didn't know that.
Yeah. She's so great. And I was talking to her and I said, you folks probably know each other from Twitter. And she said, actually, we've been real life friends for 10 years. And I was like,
I love Temma.
not even, but you're real life friends. And she tweeted something that you may have seen. She said, biracial and Black Jews are terrified right now because if we don't speak at this moment, we might never be asked to speak again.
Yeah, that is so true. That is totally true. Yeah.
And so I want to call light to that statement because that for me was eye-opening as a white person to be able to read that. There was another question that came in that said, this person wants to ask about how you found Judaism or how you came to your current rendition of Judaism, but not in a way for you to justify your Jewishness. I'd love to highlight if there's any part of your journey that is like meaningful to you that you would love to share, we would like to hear it.
Yeah, actually, and thank you for that, because I actually kind of left that out, because that's something else I often talk about. For me, Judaism is about community. In fact, I wasn't even asked as a rabbinical school student until my second to last year before I graduated what my feelings were about God. And I was like, oh, nobody's asked me. And it was a class. And so I just thought it was funny. But actually it was kind of appropriate before I go out into the world to sort of have my own understanding of what God means to me. But my entry into Judaism, I became really good friends, with a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Joshua Lesser, one of the first, if not the first, openly gay rabbi to enter rabbinical school. And we became friends. I didn't really understand what a rabbi was because I had my own biases of what clergy was, and it was very Christian-centric. I also had a Jewish girlfriend at the time, and I started asking him questions. And he's like, "Oh, just come to my synagogue." And I was like, okay. So actually it was a little more than that. I was sort of kind of scared for some reason. But I did finally go. And there was something about it. Maybe because it was a room full of activists. Maybe it was because there was other people from the community that I knew. Maybe because it was the first time I'd been in a religious space where people could just be themselves, all themselves. And nobody cared. And I just kept going back, even when Josh wasn't on the Bima. When it was Layla, I just kept going back. So everything that I do now is a sort of reminder from that what I love about Judaism is being in community, and that's one of the reasons why I start off trying to form a Zoom community for the time that we're on, so that we can be in community together. Remind people that Jews need to be in community, and it breaks my heart that people do not, or have been made to not feel welcomed because of some part of their identity when they walk into synagogues, and they need those spaces, and I want us to do better.
Amen. Thank you. You talk a lot about inclusion, and we asked questions, and of course it's making you do the work and say, what can we do to be better? What can we do to show up? But instead of asking spaces to accommodate other people or asking spaces to be safer, to be braver, do you have any words of wisdom to offer to young queer Jewish folks, to young Black queer folks from the QD BIPOC or QD by JPOC experience? Do you have any words of advice on how to be your authentic self and be true to you instead of being true to the spaces that you're in?
It's a growing thing. I had a young Black student on campus who, to my knowledge, is not Jewish, but asked me that question, like how I navigate being, gay me, Jewish me, because he's trying to figure that out. And I think it's a process, and some of us are in different areas of that. And then I really try to encourage people to the best that they can to be authentic to themselves for that moment. And I don't know if this is part of your question or not, but for Jews who need to be in Jewish spaces or want to be in Jewish spaces, the first thing I think is just to find a community that they can fit into. So like I'm saying that because either that could be a group of friends, that could be an online community, that could be something. And so like finding a group of people that you feel connected enough to be in Jewish spaces and building those relationships will help you to feel more authentic to yourself, so that you can bring your whole self. Because I want people to bring their whole selves, but I also am aware that people are often protecting themselves for whatever reasons.
Thank you so much. So I want to be mindful of your time as well, but I do believe we have received all the questions. But Rabbi Sandra is very online. I love to say that, like very online on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, and I will share all of the links to those so that you may connect with her. She's a really wonderful person to follow in terms of resources and content. And then also, I believe that Rabbi Sandra would be willing to connect with you and answer your questions.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah.
And I just want to thank you so much for being the speaker for this event that is in partnership with CIJA, with Calgary Pride, with the Jewish Federation of Calgary, with Temple B'nai Tikvah, and as well with Beth Tzedec congregation. These folks are all on the line. So I'm happy that this will be far-reaching, and I want to thank you so much for your spirit and your time and for all of the knowledge and your lived experience that you brought forward for us.
And thank you all. Like this is just really good for me. Like a lot of people, I'm isolated in many ways, and any opportunity that I can be in some form of community with other Jews is just always great. It does a lot for my soul. So thank you.
Wishing your neshama very, very well. Thank you so much.
This is fun. I like it. Yeah, I hope I get to meet you all one of these days in real time space, physical space, I should say.
Thank you all for being a part of this presentation today, and thank you, Rabbi Sandra, for sharing with us your story, your passion, and your insights. You have truly highlighted for us not only a central message of pride, but also one of the core messages of Judaism. We have to celebrate our accomplishments, but never, never rest on our laurels, because we will never be whole as a society or as a people until everyone has a true place at the table. With that in mind, I would like to close today by inviting you all to join me in singing the opening verse of Psalm 133, because that is the vision we are striving for. The day when all of us can sit together in unity and none will be afraid, because as it is written in our Torah, all of them shall know me. Hine ma tov uman na'im shevet achim gam yachad. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is when we all can be together as one. Hine ma tov uman na'im shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov uman na'im shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Yai dai dai, yai dai dai, dai dai dai. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Yai dai dai, yai dai dai, dai dai dai. Hine ma tov uman na'im shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov uman na'im shevet achim gam yachad. Happy Pride, everyone.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Sandra Lawson. First of all, thank you all for letting me spend some time with you. The song I'm going to sing is Kaddish. And Kaddish is the traditional Jewish prayer that we say when we lose someone. And it's a prayer that helps us to lift up the memories of those who are no longer with us. And when we recite this prayer, we remember that all of the goodness, grace, and love in the world has often come to us from those whose lives have touched us. And so we remember them and their memories. And I wrote this song, I can't remember if I said this or not, but I wrote this song. It was the first song that I ever wrote because I was grieving and crying from all of the senseless murders, and I was watching them play out on our television. So here goes. Yid Gadol, Beit Kadash, Shemei, Rabba, Beyama, Dira, Firate. Dear God, lift me up in my time of need. Please show me how to live and love in peace. I want to live in a world that's full of hope, but it's so damn hard when there's so much pain. Violate Israel, Bagala, Uvisman, Kareem, Vimru, Amen. Adonai, I praise your holy name. Please turn my sorrow, turn my pain, and show me the way. Adonai, we bless your holy name, so that one day there may be peace for us all. Oh, say shalom, Beth, Rama, Uya, say shalom. Hallelujah, Israel. Amen. And thank you.